Hello students, I'm Dr. Himanshu Kandpal, Assistant Professor English, Government MS College for Women, Bikaner. Today we are going to study about the poet George Gordon Lord Byron. George Gordon Byron was born on January 22, 1788 in London, England. His father was Captain John Byron and his mother was Catherine Gordon, a Scottish heiress who was the captain's second wife. He was born with a club foot which restricted his movements and made him extremely sensitive about it. After his father died in France in 1791, his mother took him to live in Aberdeen, where they lived on a meager income till he was 10 years old. In 1798, at the age of 10, Byron unexpectedly inherited his great uncle William the Fifth Byron's title and also the vast property left behind by him. The inheritance helped him come back to England with his mother and stay at Newstead Abbey. He studied at Aberdeen Grammar School and then Trinity College in Cambridge. During this time, Byron collected and published his first volumes of poetry. The first, published anonymously, entitled Fugitive Pieces, was printed in 1806 and contained miscellaneous of poems, some of which were written when Byron was only 14. As a whole, the collection was considered obscene as it contained frank, erotic verses. At the request of a friend, Byron recalled and burned all but 4 copies of the book, then immediately began compiling a revised version, though it was not published during his lifetime. The next year, however, Byron published his second collection, Hours of Idleness, which contained many of his early poems as well as significant additions, including poems addressed to John Addleston, a younger boy whom Byron had befriended and deeply loved. By Byron's 20th birthday, he faced overwhelming debt. Though his second collection received an initially favorable response, a disturbingly negative review was printed in January of 1808, followed by even more scathing criticism a few months later. His response was a satire, English Bard and Scotch Rivers, which received mixed attention from publicly humiliated and with nowhere else to turn. Byron set out on a tour of the Mediterranean, traveling with a friend to Portugal, Spain, Albania, Turkey, and finally Athens. Enjoying his newfound sexual freedom, Byron decided to stay in Greece after his friend returned to England, studying the language and working on a poem loosely based on his adventures. Inspired by the culture and climate around him, he later wrote to his sister, "If I am a poet, the air of Greece has made me one." So after that, Byron returned to England in the summer of 1811 and having completed the opening cantos of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, a poem which tells the story of a world-weary young man looking for meaning in the world. When the first 2 cantos were published in March of 1812, the expensive first printing sold out in 3 days. Byron reportedly said, which really became famous, "I awoke one morning and found myself famous." An outspoken politician in the House of Lords, Byron used his popularity for public good, speaking in favor of workers' rights and social reforms. He also continued to publish romantic tales in verse. His personal life, however, remained rocky. He was married and divorced his wife, and Isabella Milbank, having accused him of everything from incest to sodomy. A number of love affairs also followed, including one with Claire Claremont, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley's sister-in-law. By 1816, Byron was afraid of his life and was warned that a crowd might lynch him if he were seen in public. Till then, Lord Byron's The Courier, published in 1814, was a great hit and sold over 10,000 copies on the very first day of its publication. He was forced to flee England. Byron settled in Italy and began writing his masterpiece Don Juan, an epic satire novel in verse loosely based on a legendary hero. He also spent much of his time engaged in the Greek fight for independence and planned to join a battle against a Turkish held fortress when he fell ill, becoming increasingly sick with persistent cold and fevers. When he died on April 19, 1824, at the age of 36, Don Juan was yet to be finished. Though 17 cantos had been written, Lord Byron died in Greece from an illness on April 19, 1824. His body was returned to England, but the deans at both St. Paul's and Westminster refused to accept it. His body was finally buried in Hucknall, Torquay, which is located in Nottinghamshire near Newstead Abbey. His compositions influenced many writers in future. Lord Byron was made a Fellow of the Royal Society posthumously. Today, Byron's Don Juan is considered one of the greatest long poems in English written since John Milton's Paradise Lost. The Byronic hero, characterized by passion, talent, and rebellion, pervades Byron's work and greatly influenced the work of the later Romantic poets. A few things to mention here. George Gordon, Lord Byron, John Keats, and Percy Bysshe Shelley belong to the second generation of Romantic poets. Their works exhibit passion and revolutionary zeal. These three writers offer many points of close resemblance, hence they are often studied together. The late poets William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, and Robert Southey were called the first generation of Romantic poets. If they set the trend of poetry writing in England, the second generation of poets carried it further ahead. Keats, Shelley, and Byron freed poetry from all its restraints. They form a group by themselves. The intensity of their art was understood by the elite. Byron crossed the boundaries of his country and conquered Europe with his fiery imagination. Keats and Shelley also won name and fame in the continent. So the Romantics altogether heightened in their works the dignity and simplicity. Emotions like joy, dejection, rapture, horror were highlighted by the Romantics. So Lord Byron was a famous English poet and a leading figure in the Romantic movement. They reacted against the classical standards of balance, order, restraint, proportion, and objectivity. Lord Byron was a famous poet and a leading figure in the Romantic movement. He was also known for creating a cult of Byronic heroes who were melancholic and brooding young men filled with thoughts of something that had occurred in their past life which they could not forget. He had an immense influence on European music, painting, opera, novel writing, and poetry as long as he lived. He was the sixth Baron to get the title of Baron. He was one of the greatest poets in English history and was of the same stature as Percy Bysshe Shelley and John Keats. His poetry and his personality made a greater impact on literary minds and the general public of Europe at that time. He was seen as a man with radical ideas by many people and worshipped as a national hero by the Greeks for fighting for them against the Turks. Byron was unique among Romantic poets in that he respected the neoclassical poets. As the Romantic poets, they reacted against classical standards of balance, order, restraint, proportion, and objectivity. But he was the one who has immense respect for the neoclassical poets and sought to some degree to emulate them. Most Romantic poets sought to overturn the old conventions and to create a new poetry based on creativity and individualism. Byron used diverse verse structures, but he, like Pope and Dryden, wrote satires about society and other poets. This is all about George Gordon, Lord Byron. I hope you like the video. Share, like and subscribe. Thank you.